Hi, welcome to the East Central Indiana Solid Waste District series on composting. I'm going to break the videos up into 5 different sections. Some of them I'll be at my home composting bin to give you some examples. And I'm also going to make it easy so you can look at one video or you can look at all 5. I'll put them all together at the end and make them into one long video. The first thing I'm going to cover is why. At the Solid Waste District, our main goal is to reduce waste, and that is my stance as well, is to reduce the amount of organic waste that I send to the landfill. On average, about 25% of what we send to a landfill is organic waste. A landfill produces an anaerobic environment for our waste, which causes our organic waste to release methane gas as it breaks down. When we compost it in our yard instead, not only do we reduce landfill space and methane gas, we also produce a healthy, usable soil for our yard. As a person who enjoys her garden and likes to reduce the amount of chemicals we use in our yard, composting also provides me a free resource of good garden soil and a good way to amend the soil in my yard. Up next is location. Remember that we are trying to encourage rot, so you wouldn't want to put your compost bin next to any structure in your garden or near your house. Sometimes our compost bin does have an odor. It shouldn't have an odor all the time, but when you first dump your kitchen waste, there might be a slight odor. So that's another reason not to put it next to your patio or your deck. I keep mine next to my far gardens. That's a good place where I'm putting a lot of my waste as I'm cleaning it out of the gardens, and a good place to be able to have it and have access to it readily. It doesn't matter whether it's in the shade or the sun. There's pluses and minuses to both locations. So put it wherever it's going to work for you. Up next are bin types, and there are millions of different ways you can compost in the different kinds of bins. Anything from a small Rubbermaid tote to a trash can to a store-bought container to a built wooden 3-bin construction. Anything will work. You can even have just a pile in your yard and it will work. I've seen composting where they did trench composting, where they dug channels inside the garden and composted right in the garden. So figure out whatever works for you and your location. The only quick thing I would add about bins is that the whole goal of this is to work with nature. So we want our bins to have access to the ground in some way so that earthworms and other decomposers can come into our compost bin and help us decompose it. So if our bin is not touch the ground, then we're going to need to add handfuls of soil from our garden or other dirt into our compost bin to help it break down. Now we're going to talk about what would go into your compost bin. The combination that you want to put in your compost bin consists of carbons and nitrogens. Some people call them greens and browns, but I like to think of them as dry ingredients and wet ingredients. Here are some examples of green and brown materials. So green materials are going to be things from your kitchen, like kitchen waste, coffee grounds, and you can include the filter. Orange peels, banana peels, and other things from your kitchen are going to be the green ingredients, also called wet ingredients, and that would be the nitrogen ingredients. The brown ingredients, which are the dry/carbon ingredients, are things like leaves and grass clippings, straw, plant material from your flower beds, or if you don't have a lot of these ingredients, you can also use different kinds of paper. Some things I would not include in my personal compost bin, and examples of things I would find in my yard, are pine needles, pine cones, and sticks bigger than my pinky is the rule that I follow. Some other things I would not include from my yard include things like poison ivy vine, or anything that's spiky or pokey, like a rose bush or something from a thorn tree, things like that. I would also not include any type of plastic trash like milk jugs or any type of labels. Also, no dairy or meat or bones. Some people recommend using bread and grain products, but I do not recommend that because I've found that it encourages certain types of pests more. So one thing I mentioned in the first video was that your compost bin is probably going to not be right by your house. So the biggest obstacle is going to be a way to collect your kitchen waste, and it will have a little bit of an odor at times. So you're going to want to use a container that has a lid on it. So you could use a coffee can with a lid if you want to keep it under your sink, your kitchen sink. You could use a kitty litter bucket with a lid. I've heard of people using a plastic bag and put their kitchen waste in the bag and then keep it in their freezer. Because there are times, even though it's beautiful today, that you don't want to run out to the compost bin every time you eat a banana. Okay, now it's time to create our layers. And what you want to do is have a layer of each. Now, you're not always going to have all your leaves and grass clippings ready to go. You're probably going to get a big batch of them in the fall. And so we'll talk a little bit about holding pins and things like that in just a second. But first, let me show how you layer your compost bin. So when your kitchen bucket gets full, you're going to bring it out to your compost bin and you're going to dump it in. And it's going to look and smell pretty gross at this point. Okay, so that's one of our layers. Now right now it's going to be really smelly and pretty gross, and that's one reason why we create our layers. So what you're going to do is have some leaves and grass clippings nearby, and you're just going to layer those on top. Now an interesting thing that's going to happen with your compost bin is it's going to seem like it's almost full every time you dump stuff into it. And then the next time that you come out to it, say a week later, you'll see that things are already starting to break down. So it will hardly ever really get all the way full unless your layers aren't right. So one thing I recommend if you have the yard space for it is to have a holding bin. So this is our compost holding bin, and this is where we put a lot of our dry ingredients until we're ready to layer them in the compost bin. So this isn't going to break down because it doesn't have the nitrogen mixed into it. It's just holding the ingredients until we need them for the other compost bin. And this is where I will draw my dry layer to put on top of my kitchen waste. The next part of our composting series is to talk about stirring. And first I want to say that you don't have to stir if you don't want to. It will just take your compost longer to break down. But if you do want to stir, and that helps make sure that it gets hot enough by aerating the soil and aerating your compost, then there's different ways that you can do that, and I'm going to show you some ways. The first idea for stirring your compost is if you had multiple compost bins, and you would scoop the contents of one compost bin into the next compost bin, and as the process would stir all of the contents. One of the easiest and probably the most common way to stir your compost is to use a potato fork or a pitchfork. And this method involves stabbing and fluffing in a way, like tossing a salad, or you could also scoop it this direction and lift and just kind of add air into your compost as you go. My favorite way to stir the compost bin is to use one of these bits. You find it in the paint or drywall section of a hardware store, add it into your cordless drill, then all you have to do is drill into your compost bin and pull it back out. Nice, effective way to stir your compost bin with minimal effort. When it's time for you to use some of your compost, we call that harvesting, and that basically means separating your finished compost from your compost bin. You want to try and get it from the bottom of the bin, and this particular bin is really nice because it has a little door that I can access the compost. So you're going to stick a shovel in there and scoop some of it out. Once you scoop some out, you'll see that things have broken down at a different speed. So some things are still going to be a little bit bigger than others, and you might want to separate that out. You can use it just like this, but one thing I like to do is use this screen that we made using 1x4s and a little bit of chicken wire on the bottom. Scoop your finished compost into that over a wheelbarrow and then shake it, and it'll separate out the bigger pieces. Now you can take the bigger chunks and put them back in your compost bin to spend a little more time breaking down. And in your wheelbarrow, you'll have nice finished compost.